growing very rapidly.
Right.
So if one could replace steel and aluminum, you could already take about a third of a carbon, those 5 billion tons or five and a half. So you see that then you win in two places, right? You win because you're using the carbon, but you're also putting out of business a material that's causing a lot of emissions.
Welcome to an episode of Strategic Conversations. We host insightful discussions with top business leaders and top thinkers. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are hosting Dr. Matteo Pasquali, the director of the Carbon Hub, and the A.J. Hartsook Professor of Chemical Engineering, Chemistry, and Material Science at the Rice University. Professor Pasquali will be a speaker at the Houston Strategy Forum's upcoming Energy Evolution Symposium. We're really excited to host him. He has great things to share with us. I'm Ravi Kathuria, the president of the Houston Strategy Forum and author of the management and leadership book, How Cohesive is Your Company, and author of Happy Soul, Hungry Mind. Strategic Conversations is hosted by the Houston Strategy Forum. If you value these conversations, please hit like and subscribe to the Houston Strategy Forum's YouTube channel. Today's episode is sponsored by Cohegic, a management consulting and executive coaching firm. Thank you for joining us, and we are looking forward to a great discussion with Dr. Pasquali. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time today to join us, Matteo. We appreciate you. We are so excited that you will be joining us on August 31st at the Energy Evolution Symposium.
Hey, Ravi, thanks a lot for having me. I truly enjoyed the event I attended last spring on carbon dioxide, and it was stimulating, it was fun, it was engaging. So I really look forward to this next event that's coming up towards the end of the month.
I appreciate you saying that, Dr. Pasquali. Appreciate that plug. We're going to use that in an ad. But yeah, it is true. We have a lot of fun at the Houston Strategy Forum. Our format is so unique, and the discussion, because we are a discussion forum, not a presentation forum, gets all the ideas flowing. Sir, tell us about the Carbon Hub. What is the mission of the Carbon Hub? How are you leading it? What are you thinking? What are you focused at the Carbon Hub? What is its purpose?
So the Carbon Hub comes from, starts with a conversation I had about 8 years ago with Carl Masters, who at that time was the chief scientist for catalysis in chemistry at Shell. And he said, we have too many hydrocarbons. We can't burn them all because of CO2 emissions and climate change. He says, do you have any ideas on what we could do? And then I realized that we were actually using hydrocarbons to make high performance materials. Yeah. We were making already fibers of carbon nanotubes, and the first step in that was to convert a hydrocarbon into carbon nanotubes, and then the carbon nanotubes in fibers. And then I thought, why can't we do this on a very large scale? And what are the implications if we do this on a very large scale? And so we engaged with Shell and other colleagues, and within about a year, we realized that the implications are massive. If one could make these materials based out of carbon cheaply and efficiently, so without expending a lot of energy, then there would be massive benefits. There would be benefits because one would displace industrial materials that are very dirty, like steel, aluminum, copper. There would be benefits because the hydrogen is co-generated, right? The hydrocarbons are hydrogen and carbon. Yes. And if you make a carbon material, then hydrogen is freed in that reaction. Yeah. And there's benefits in terms of supply chains, security, and hydrocarbon industry, We already know how to locate hydrocarbons. We know how to get them out of the ground and deliver them very effectively, efficiently, responsibly. Those hydrocarbons are here. They're here in Texas. They're in the U.S. They're in any country really has them or has neighbors of access. So we don't have to go disturb fragile ecosystems, and we would preserve jobs and create new jobs because now we would have these new materials, right?
Yes.
And then we thought, okay, so if we are going to do this, right, and we need to organize, right? We need
Yes.
something to organize it, and we thought, okay, this is how the Carbon Hub started, and it was really the idea of put carbon at the center and say, what can we do if we use carbon productively as a solid, as a material? And it could be a material that's more high end, like materials that will be better than steel or better than aluminum. But it could be also at medium end, like could be a carbon black that's made more sustainably instead of the way we make carbon black now, which is partial combustion. Or it could be also, could we make very, very cheap grades of carbon that could be used, for example, to increase productivity of soils or to clean up water, right? And how do we enable this? And so about 4 years ago, we started the Carbon Hub to do this, and I've been directing it since then.
I love what you said, sir, and I love the purpose. It makes complete sense that you hit on so many points. Is that we have availability of hydrocarbons. We need to create jobs and sustain the economy. And if we can take hydrocarbons and produce, whether it is carbon or CO2, and then use those in applications. We at the Houston Strategy Forum, we don't use the term CO2 utilization. We call it CO2 productization, right? Or C productization. How do you take carbon dioxide, which is left if it enters the atmosphere, then it affects climate. But if we take the CO2 and we can productize it, then how powerful that becomes. And to your point, the other byproduct is hydrogen, which can then be used for energy, and we can use hydrogen to produce energy. So it can become a huge win. We can not only drive the economy, drive jobs, and create these materials that are stronger using carbon, plus produce hydrogen. How wonderful that is. So give us a feel for how well are we doing that? How far are we in scaling that up? And how much hydrocarbons can we use that? Will we get to the point where hydrocarbon, this application of separating CO2 and into hydrogen becomes the primary application as opposed to transportation, right? Because down the road with that gasoline is getting burned and then releasing the emissions. Can we consume so much hydrocarbons where there is value?
Okay, so these are great questions. These are the first questions actually we have to ask ourselves. So a few things. First of all is we're looking at routes where we do not have to convert the CO2.
Okay.
And I'll explain you why. Is you can think about energy levels. Hydrocarbons start about here. If you look at carbon and hydrogen, they are a little bit higher energy than hydrocarbons. So you have to give it a little bit of energy to go from hydrocarbons to hydrogen and carbon. But if you go to CO2, if you burn the hydrocarbon, then you go down here. There's no energy left in CO2.
Right.
And by the way, the hydrogen has gone to water, right? Because
yes.
So now you need to go from here and bring him back here, right? And every time you do these steps, every engineer knows, in principle, you could do it with high efficiency, but in practice, the efficiency is limited. And when you go up, the efficiency becomes more and more limited. So essentially, because the burning of the hydrocarbon is done to harvest energy, then more energy will be needed to go back up. So we're looking at routes where we are going directly from from hydrocarbons to carbon.
Carbon. Okay.
And we are saying, look, there's a lot of natural pathways by which hydrocarbons are, sorry, by which CO2 is converted into hydrocarbons, or materials, the substances that have about equivalent energy, biological processes, right? Plants and trees are doing this all the time. So there could be other ways to block the CO2 pathway by taking, for example, biomass that has been fixated by natural ways and using the biomass as feedstock. And therefore taking the CO2 out of circulation,
Yes.
letting nature do the hard step, which is the conversion of CO2 to a substance that has more energy, right? So that's the first one. The second one is let me change the order a little bit. Let me give you, because you asked me how far are we in the scale up and where we can go. Let me tell you where we can go.
Okay.
So the total amount of hydrocarbons that we produce every year, we extract every year, this is fossil hydrocarbons, sticking to
Right.
oil and gas. It's about 4.2 billion tons of oil and 2.5 billion tons of gas. And you and I bantered at your last meeting about using metrics, but
Yes.
if we start using barrels, we're not going to come around. So 4.2 and 2.5 billion tons of oil and gas. If you break it up into its constituents, which are almost only hydrogen and carbon, you see it's about 5.5 billion tons of carbon, and it's a little over 2 billion tons of hydrogen, if I did the math correctly in my head.
Yes. Yes.
So that's how much we have available. We already have some pathways where we make materials. For example, out of that pathway, a little less than 10% goes into making plastics. About 350 million tons of plastics. Primarily, they derive from fractions of hydrocarbons, right?
Right.
But in plastics is growing, but you can't quite replace aluminum and steel with plastics.
Right.
Now, so there are some of these carbon materials, and maybe I'll show them to you. These are, for example, made by a company here in the Woodlands, Huntsman.
Okay.
Some of
Yes.
these actually have properties that overlap with steel and aluminum. So steel is close to 2 billion tons a year, and aluminum is about 75 million tons a year. It's growing very rapidly.
Right.
So if one could replace steel and aluminum, you could already take about a third of that carbon, those 5 billion tons or 5.5. So you see that then you win in two places, right? You win because you're using the carbon, but you're also putting out of business a material that's causing a lot of emissions. Now, if you can make, in this case, for soil, you don't need a solid material, you need a granular material.
Yes.
But if you can make a material that's similar to biochar, this is something a lot of us use in gardening, etc. Biochar is too expensive for very large scale use, but if we could make it inexpensive with properties that are similar to biochar, you're talking about a few 100 million tons a year of carbon that could go into making soil more productive, right? And then you get virtuous cycles, right? Because for example, if you use biochar, you don't have to use as much fertilizers. You don't have to use as much water because the biochar helps retain the fertilizer, release it more slowly, retain the water. And so you then get more advantages because if you don't have to make as much fertilizer, then you don't need to make as much ammonia, which is another place where we make a lot of CO2. And if you can get land that is marginally viable into being more productive, again, you get more land available for food production. You don't have to go clear cut forest to make food, right? Which is a lot of. So I think that aspirationally, you could see how one could use maybe not the totality of the hydrocarbons, but a very large fraction. And there is something that it's a little bit of a long shot, but there is a question: is can we build buildings with this?
Yes.
For sure, we already build buildings out of wood. right? It's
Yeah.
but can we start displacing some of the concrete and the cement?
Yes.
Because if we could, then that you're talking about more than 10 billion tons a year. And so
Yeah.
if we could get to the point that we're displacing concrete and cement, then we would use all the hydrocarbons we're using now and maybe more, right?
Yeah.
So that is the big prize at the end of the road. So we don't think that there is a limitation in the capability of material markets to uptake carbon. It's just a question of whether the carbon can be good enough, which is more for steel and aluminum replacement, or inexpensive enough, which is more the question for a biochar equivalent, and it has to do the job, right? It has to be good enough to do the job. Like when you said, fire retardancy, it doesn't have to be the best fire retardant ever, but it has to be good enough to be equivalent to what we use right now in our houses, in our office buildings, etc.
Yes, it basically has to beat wood.
Yes, yes.
I'm not using steel in my home. I'm using wood, and so and drywall.
And by the way, this is a conductive carbon, and so in many cases, what we're seeing is copper is over-engineered for what we're doing. It's there's a lot of places like in our car, we're using copper for all the signal lines. We don't really need the high conductivity material to turn on our turn signal, but we're carrying around that copper all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so we're also looking at ways to say, where is it that we can have a material that's good enough, but has a lower CO2 footprint and it's lighter, for example, than copper. And then you're asking, where are we on the scale up, right?
Yes.
And so I would say that there's really three sections that I would call. One is that the materials that can displace copper, steel, aluminum, etc. And the one who's most advanced right now, it's Huntsman. Huntsman is at the level of tons going to tens of tons a year. So it's small, okay? But it's not a lab. It's for materials, this is already a small pilot, right? So if you think about we always have to compare, like a carbon fiber plant that makes a few thousand tons a year. So they are right now at about maybe 100 times smaller than carbon fiber plant, right? Then, of course, if you look at steel, then you got another order of magnitude or more in terms of plant size. But this is moving very rapidly. I mean, this is something that 5-6 years ago, when I first talked about this, I was getting laughed out of the room in some cases. And now that a company like Huntsman would be doing this and it would already be at the scale, it's very impressive. And they had a lot of support from ARPA-E, from the federal government, from the Department of Energy, and they put out their own investment and they're doing fantastic work. There's some other companies that are targeting more copper, for example, replacements or conductive material. They're a little bit smaller. Now they're at, say, at the 100 kilo a year. One of them is Dexmat. It's here in Houston. It's a startup that I co-founded a few years ago, actually with funding from the Air Force, because it was to make the high-end material. But now they're also cutting down costs and making the material much more efficiently, so that right now they're at a fraction of a ton, let's say 0.1 tons a year, and they're scaling to about a ton a year. And again, it's happening very rapidly. So I think we're starting to see the beginning of this exponential growth. It sounds like sometimes things are small and not moving much. Here now what I see, it's small, but it's moving up. Now, if I look at carbon black, the leaders is Monolith. Monolith is a U.S. company that was started, I believe, about a decade ago. And they have a technology that can make carbon black by breaking methane into carbon and hydrogen. So they make both carbon black and hydrogen, and they have now proven reactors at the scale of about 10,000 tons per year. And so now this is a commercial scale. and they're building a plant right now. And again, they have significant backing from the Department of Energy loan program. They're going to order of 100,000 tons a year. And Ravi, I'm giving you these numbers by heart. So these are, it could be 150, but it's a rough. And this is it's under construction right now. And that would be a commercial size plant for carbon black. 100,000 tons a year is it's as big as most other commercial size plants. So that's the one that's most advanced. Now the market of carbon black is not that big. It's about 50 million tons a year. So they will have a cap at some point, but certainly this is very promising. For some other things, like what I was telling you about the soil concept, water purification, these are a little bit more aspirational. We know that in terms of properties, carbon can do those jobs. We have got water filter at home where carbon is. We don't know if we can make that a type of carbon that's equivalent to that cost effectively, right? At a cost that is affordable. So I think that's a little bit where the technology is in that area, is a little bit more at defining the space where one has to get to be relevant.
I love all the examples that you have shared, especially the one about construction, because you're right. At the Houston Strategy Forum, we host carbon conclaves, and then this example of construction has come up. And I've shared the example where in India they used to burn the stubble after the crops crop season is done. And instead of burning the stubble, they're now using that in construction material. So they're capturing that carbon would never be released into the atmosphere now. But if we could take hydrocarbons and separate them into carbon and then use that in construction material and all these other applications, you talked about huntsmen. We need to invite huntsmen to the Houston Strategy Forum so they can come share their progress there. But all these applications, whether it's new plastics that are better or can replace existing construction material, plus the concrete and other materials that you use. The population is growing. We need more and more construction material all over the world. And so carbon prioritization could be an excellent idea. Sir, I cannot wait to host you on August 31st to get into this discussion in greater detail and talk about energy evolution at the Energy Evolution Symposium, of course. Sir, what would be your message on August 31st? What is it that you want to share with the world?
Well, what I want to share is one of it is carbon is our ally.
Yeah.
Carbon is the only element that's very prevalent on Earth in reduced form, meaning it's not oxidized, right? Yeah. And the reason is whether it was last week or millions of years ago, a plant fixed the sun's energy, right, and made that reduced form of carbon.
Yeah,
you don't have that for iron. All iron there's iron that we reduced as humans, but everything else is iron oxide on the Earth for us.
Yeah,
same thing is true for aluminum. So carbon is a big asset. And we need to think about it as an asset. We need to think it as about a feedstock, not as a fuel. Much like wood. Wood is not a fuel. Of course, we can burn wood, and we did it for a long time.
Yes,
we'll do, but it's not a fuel. It's a material that then we can use for burning. But most of the time, we get more value if we make furniture, like your beautiful bookcase behind you, right?
Thank you.
And also we get a lot more economic value when we make wood to make furniture, for example, or house panels.
Yes.
For burn, right?
Yes.
And so the one message is carbon is an asset, and we need to differentiate carbon from carbon dioxide, which has its own pros and cons, right?
Yes.
So now another message is that we need to look at systems, and this is something that I feel very heartened that some of our leaders are starting to do. I'm seeing these both in government and in leadership of large corporations. We need to look at systems. We can't say something that just we're driving an electric car.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's making the car and
Yeah.
who's making the electricity?
Yes. The total cost of not ownership, but the total cost of the carbon footprint, right? From every aspect of it. Yes.
It's also, we cannot have only carbon footprint as we can't have a carbon footprint to CO2 tunnel vision, because CO2 right now is very pressing, but there's other problems that we largely solved in the past that couldn't come back to haunt us, right? Is again, if we have to restart mining in the US for copper, for precious, for rare earths, etc., is that has a cost, that has a big environmental cost. And so we need to look at things holistically, and we need to look at systems, and we need to stop making decisions based on emotions, and we need to make decisions rationally. This is very difficult because we're humans, and we tend to make decisions emotionally. No matter how rational we are, we do list A and list B. Eventually, the decision is always emotional, right?
Yes.
And then, but somehow this is now the price for making these emotional decisions is becoming very high. And I may give examples. Is why do we need to drive a car that has a 400 miles range if we're driving 95% of the time inside the loop, or inside even the third loop,
if you're driving 30 to 60 miles maximum within the city, why do we need and why do we live with that constantly? Because we may have to make one trip to Austin every 3 months, and we need 200 miles.
And by the way, we don't do this on the cell phone.
Right?
We want our cell phone to be fully charged in the morning when we get up, and if it has 10% charge by the time we go to bed, we're good, right?
Yeah.
And in a few times it happens that during the day we need to charge a little bit. We are not buying the cell phones because once in a while we go hiking for a week and we don't have electricity, maybe, and in that case we make some other provisions, like
yes.
And so I think that this is, or why is it that we need to drive electric cars that have an acceleration that's faster than a Ferrari? Right? So I think if we're saying that we're going to be responsible and we're going to be trying to reduce emissions and be more environmentally friendly, I think that we also need to really make our decisions and take our actions in a way that's consistent with what we're saying. And what I see is that the way, for example, electric cars are marketed is the message is sustainability, but the numbers are performance. The performance is not sustainability. And that really worries me, right? And
no, I love the 3 points that you made, sir. One, carbon is an asset. We need to treat it as such. Second, we need to look at the entire cycle, the entire system when we evaluate things. And third, we need to be judicious in our consumption, right? And we need to not get carried away in just acquiring things, this consumerism that exists, right? There is no need to have overkill. We need to be judicious, because if we use the resources very judiciously, then there will be a good balance. There we're not going to be creating waste, right? Unnecessarily. And so these are fantastic points. I look forward to getting into a discussion with you and the other speakers. Some of them have counterpoints to hydrocarbons, so this is going to be a very interesting discussion, right? They want a complete alternate route there to hydrocarbons. So we'll see. I can't wait. I think this is going to be a robust debate, sir. I look forward to hosting you. I invite all of you who have watched this video, I invite you to join us on August 31st at the Energy Evolution Symposium. It is going to be a great discussion. Come engage with Dr. Pasquali here and pick his mind on everything that, you can just see everything that he's thinking about and solving these mega problems, right? And if If we can solve them and scale them, this world will be a much different place. Professor Pasquali, thank you, sir. Thank you for taking the time today. Looking forward to seeing you next week.
Yep. Thanks, Ravi. Look forward to it. Bye.
Very good. Thank you, sir.